Headliner Radio, the creative voice.
Hello and welcome to Headliner Radio, where we are joined today by Tim Rice-Oxley of Keane, who is here to have a chat with us about the band's debut album Hopes and Fears, which celebrates its 20th anniversary this year. To celebrate this milestone, the band will be releasing a special remastered version of the record on May the 10th, and on the same day will also be performing at the O2 Arena in London as part of a worldwide tour, which kicked off on April the 1st in Mexico City. And at the time of recording this podcast, Tim is joining us from somewhere out there on the road. Tim, thank you very much for joining us. How are you and whereabouts are you joining us from?
Hi, I'm very well. I'm in Guadalajara in Mexico. We just finished a little run of shows out here. And it's been amazing.
Fantastic. So enjoying the tour so far. How many dates in are you at this point?
Well, we had a brief excursion to India and South Africa, just for kind of festivals to sort of warm us up a bit.
Yeah.
And we the first kind of proper bit of the sort of Hopes and Fears anniversary tour has been out here in Mexico. So it's all just kind of taking shape still and getting the set list nailed down and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's been really fun.
Amazing. And how is the reception in those parts of the world? Obviously, here in the UK, everyone is very familiar with how successful Keane are. Do you get similar kind of responses out there? Do you get bigger responses in some of those parts of the world that you just mentioned? How do you kind of find those different territories when you arrive there?
Really varied. It's really nice to, like, India and South Africa are two places we've never been in, the 20 odd years that we've been playing gigs. We played at a sort of Lollapalooza festival in Mumbai, and, we didn't know what to expect at all. I mean, I have no idea. There might be 10 people turn up, or it was anyway. It went very well,
yeah.
And that was really nice because you feel like you sort of go to a new place and you have this huge reception and everyone's happy that you're there, and that's it makes you feel like, we can come back here and to play more cities and play more shows. And South Africa was great as well, but really different. Like it was a really youthful audience, and we played in Cape Town and Joburg, and really young crowds, which is great. But also, like, you could tell that they had they certainly knew, like, Somewhere Only We Know, and a sort of handful of songs, probably, rather than like the entire catalogue. So it's a slightly different kind of profile, or a different sort of a gig. But again, that's like being a new band, and I kind of love that. On the other hand, when we come to Mexico, it's absolutely insane and basically like being in the Beatles. I mean, wow. the Mexico City was just ridiculous. But in terms of scale, it's like, there's the size of the gigs is at least as big as the UK. So
yeah, fantastic. Amazing. Well, I'm glad to hear that it's going so well so far. And the O2 Arena in London coming up next month. Sounds like that one will no doubt be a huge night as well. But looking back at the 20 years of Hopes and Fears, I mean, I feel like we should point out, before we get stuck into talking about the record, it remains one of the most successful UK debut albums. Just a few numbers around it. In the first year of release, it sold over 2.5 million copies in the UK and 1 million in the US. Today, it's 9 times platinum in the UK. Has sold over 10 million copies worldwide. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how it feels when you put your debut record out into the world and it's met with that kind of response. It's because it's in that kind of pantheon of records over the past, 20, 30 years that have really, there's very few debuts from the UK that are in that kind of territory. How do you respond to that kind of personally and kind of artistically when you see an album, your first outing do that well?
Well, at the time, you have, obviously now we have a very different perspective on it. At the time, firstly, we were coming from a place where we had been trying, we've been just doing what bands do. We've been playing in all the little venues in London and beyond, anywhere that would take us, basically, playing to like 10 people or whatever. And so on the one hand, it was sort of unimaginable to then be talking those kind of numbers. On the other hand, we felt like we were very much, assuming that what would happen is we'd put out our first album and, hopefully that would, I don't know, have some success, and then we'd get on for next album and then, try and build it, as often happens with bands. So it probably sounds weird, but I think that by the time Hopes and Fears came out, we were already thinking like, what can we do next? So I think the result of that is that you kind of don't take the time, or we didn't take the time to sort of fully enjoy the moment, because you just think, we better get on and do something else now, and keep this thing moving. But obviously it was absolutely incredible and full of incredible little moments where you do sort of just look at it and think this is insane and amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's, as you say, it's probably quite hard to describe completely accurately how it feels at that point, because you're in the storm of it all. It's kind of all happening around you. You're not really at that point sitting back too much, I guess, and taking stock of everything that's happened, because you're caught up in that whirlwind. But I wondered if, on any moments where you did have time to reflect on what was happening, or even maybe, when you get to the end of that cycle of promo and touring around that debut record, how do you then respond when it comes to making the next album or writing the next music? Does it hang heavy on you? Is there additional pressure because of the success that you've had and the need to follow it up, or is it something that makes you kind of second guess what you might need to do next time around to emulate that level of success? I just wondered what happens creatively when you go, right, that's done now, we need to move on to the next record. Or can you just park it and say, that was that, we're starting from a clean slate, forget that happened?
I think everything you say is right there. I think that it creates, inevitably it creates a huge pressure. And that's kind of what I remember about most of the, after the initial thrill of the album doing so well, basically once, we put the album out probably a bit naively, sort of just thinking, let's hope somebody buys it, sort of thing. Let's hope we have a song that gets on the radio and it gives us a platform to build on. But, so from that moment where suddenly it's like, it's gone platinum before, on like pre-sales or whatever, I can't remember. It was like, it was obvious from like the day it came out that it was going to be huge, basically. Yeah. And so obviously that was mind blowing. But from that, you have this moment of immense sort of joy and, bewilderment of the best kind, I suppose. But like almost as soon as that's happened, it felt like, we were into the pressure zone of thinking, okay, well, we've got to, when are we going to write the next album? When are we going to record the next album? Because, the schedule was insane, and there was no time, and we were sort of just constantly kind of writing in the back of the tour bus, and every day off we were sort of in the studio writing in cities all over the world, which was great. But it felt very, the sort of the carefreeness of it goes, basically. We had a lot of fun, like, especially in fact all of our albums have been a lot of fun to make, even with the pressure of the second album. In some ways we probably had, I don't know, I really enjoyed making them, and I think there's an audible reaction to Hopes and Fears in our second album. It's much more like kind of dirty and dark and made for playing live, and it has a great energy, but it has a very different energy from the first record. I mean, I think you just can't, from that point onwards, you just can't help but be responding to your own previous efforts.
Yeah. I mean, how you said a moment ago that you knew, before the album came out, that it was going to be big. You had, there was information there that you were privy to that was suggesting, okay, this is going to do well. For how long, in advance of the release, did you get that sense of, anticipation around the release bubbling up? Did that come in the form of, seeing bigger crowds coming to the live shows? How did that manifest itself, that kind of, that hype and anticipation in advance of the record?
Well, very good question. I mean, it's bizarre because it's not a sort of instant thing, or it wasn't, everything's different now. But for us, we were literally going from, like, probably the last tour we did in a van, we were playing to maybe 100 people a night, and that seemed big. And then, if I remember rightly, the week the album came out, we played at the Forum in Kentish Town, which was 2,000 people. And that was huge for us, absolutely massive, playing in a theatre rather than a pub. So in that respect, it wasn't like we suddenly gone from playing at, the Falcon in Camden to playing at Wembley Stadium. It was a more modest, in live terms, sort of visible terms, it was quite modest. Looking back now, it seemed, playing at the Forum seemed like a big deal. But I remember, so even then we weren't prepared. And what I remember was that I think I'm right in saying that, an album would go on sale on the Monday, I think, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
But before it changed to Fridays, it was always a Monday release.
And that's the way I remember it is the album came out on a Monday probably, and then by like the next day, I think the next day we had a gig or something, and I remember the record label already knew, because of the orders from the first day, that they were like, oh yeah, it's going to be number one, it's already gone platinum, blah blah blah. And we were, no one had told us that was likely to happen. They just sort of dropped it into conversation after the first day of sales, and it just got more and more crazy from there. But so that was the first moment I remember thinking, well, that's not what we expected at all. So on the sort of record side, it wasn't like we knew weeks or months in advance that we were sort of working on this massive thing, or that it was this huge campaign that was inevitably going to be massive. I mean, maybe someone else knew that, but we didn't know. No one told us. But yeah, in live terms, like, we didn't see that until we came back, I guess, several weeks later because we released the album, we immediately went to America to sort of launch it there as well. And it was only when we got back from that a month or so later that we played at Glastonbury, and that was like enormous. And so, and then we realized, that sort of, in terms of seeing actual people coming to gigs and, real people who buy records, sort of, so that kind of manifestation of what, that sort of success looks like. That was a huge moment as well.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I was wondering if you could take us right back to the point at which you were writing the songs that made Hopes and Fears. Were these songs that you had been writing going back before the days of Keane? Were they, had you kind of, rattled through a load of other material before you kind of arrived at that batch of songs to put out as your debut? There's, the old cliche about you have your whole life to write your debut record and all that kind of stuff. Can you just talk us through when you started writing those ideas and those songs, and how long it took them to sort of take their final form?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because as we tend to do as humans, you kind of erase all the bad memories.
Yeah.
I don't know if bad memories is the right word, but I look back and I think, those songs were so easy to write. And, of course I'm always saying, why is it so difficult these days to write those songs? But it's been interesting, this process of doing a sort of remaster of the album and everything. I've gone back looking for kind of interesting stuff, and I got boxes and boxes of lyrics and notebooks and all that stuff. And it's reminded me that, we wrote hundreds of songs because I've never been in any other band. We've been friends for our whole lives. So we were playing songs and writing songs all through our teenage years, and, probably, I guess, more intensively from about, 98-ish onwards. But there were so many songs, and to get to those 11 or 12 or whatever it is, so many songs, so many versions of the songs that ended up on the album. I mean, nearly all of the songs on the album were around in, well, some of them were around in like 2000, 2001. And some of them were written a little bit later. But yeah, I mean, it was years and a lot of honing, so many different versions of all the songs to get to that kind of honed version. And we were playing live, of course, in clubs, and just trying to sort of get them to a place where people would like them. Because, we were playing Summer Only We Know and whatever at the Water Rats in King's Cross to 20 people, but you didn't think like, oh, wow, this is going to be a global hit. It just felt like, let's try and stop people drifting back to the bar.
Yeah. Were there any songs? I mean, Somewhere Only We Know is a good example, I guess, or a good place to start with this. I mean, obviously, a mega single, huge hit, made a massive impact for the band and was a huge breakthrough. Now, I understand that you can't, it's not like when you write these songs or you play them for the first time, you can kind of predict that it's going to have that level of success. But what was, with that song and perhaps any others on the album, were there any, just purely at the writing stage before you'd even performed them in front of an audience, that you earmarked as being potential, kind of breakthrough hits for the band? And whether something you were expecting that to happen with that absolutely didn't, or any that kind of surprised you, as in ones that you didn't have as high hopes for, but ended up landing really well?
Well, I do remember thinking that Summer Only We Know was good. Mainly because I played it. I remember I was writing it. I was back living with my mum and dad. And so I'd sit around writing on the piano, and I got Richard over because he lived at the other end of town and came over, and he loved it. And he was like, "Oh, play it again. So we sort of sat there thinking, oh, this is exciting. But, it doesn't really mean anything because you're still like, well, let's see what happens when we play it at our one gig in a month's time or whatever. so yeah, but I remember we thought, oh, this is a really good song. I mean, others that, like, Everybody's Changing was a bit of a rogue one. I remember we had, I remember playing that to Caroline Ellery, who signed us to Universal Publishing long before we had a record deal, which was which was great. So she was our sort of big ally. While we were still kind of struggling to get heard. But I remember she sort of picked that out and said, she sort of said, well, what else have you got apart from, whatever I'd played her? And I had this sort of really basic demo, just with that sort of piano sort of thing, which sounded quite annoying to me at the time. And this very sort of garbled vocal that sort of sounded like a kind of out of tune Tom York. And she was like, oh, that's going to be amazing, that one. So we, that was quite nice, because then you're like, okay, we better do some work on this and turn it into something. So the thing is, you're in a vacuum, really. We were lucky we had a couple of people around us, Caroline and our manager Adam. Well, he was just a friend, really. But, he was always a great sounding board. He was obviously one step removed from the band. So you kind of relied on other people and then playing them live just to see who responded. So you never, I still don't know with songs. We ended up with this squad of songs that seemed to go down well when we played them in the pub.
Yeah. Is that something that like over time, with records beyond the debut, do you find that you're ever able to get a feel or an inkling for what might do, particularly well, or is it still something that can kind of leap out and surprise you from one record to the next?
Yeah, I mean, I have less and less idea. I sometimes think I've written a banger, and then I tend to work in like little batches of demos. So I'll send them off to the other guys in the band. I'll be like, oh, they'll like this one. And, it's normally, I get very sort of heartbroken when one that I think is sort of going to be universally loved is sort of, everyone's like, man. But, obviously they'll often pick out something else that, and so in short, I basically have no idea.
No, I mean, were there any songs that made the album that you really had to kind of fight for, if you like, that maybe didn't get the response you were hoping for from your bandmates, that you then had to really kind of push and go, no, this is good, this has got something, like, where you need to kind of give this one time? Or is it always just that fairly kind of democratic process?
Well, on the first album, I think we all, as far as I remember, we were all very much in love with all the songs, and we'd road tested them in a way that you never get to do again, because you really are playing to, like, I mean, we just played some terrible places and gigs where you're trying to win people over who have no interest in you at all, and no vested interest. So I suppose if you can win those people over, you've got good stuff. And we had a squad that we felt very confident about, and I think we all loved, as far as I remember, for the first album. But yeah, from then on, it's a learning process, and I'm still learning very much so. I think we all are. I mean, I've had songs that I've fought for, and like, say, there's so many examples. If I could go back, I remember, like, Tom was always against Put It Behind You on the second album, and I wish I'd listened to him, or we'd listened to him. I mean, there's so many things where my point being that I think I've learned that if somebody in the band has a really bad feeling about a song, it's probably with good reason, and vice versa. If someone really fights for something, then I think it's good to persevere with it. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of examples. The last album, I felt like we didn't always get our song selection right. But it's just so hard to know, and you get so involved in it. Like the second album was so pressured. I remember getting to like pretty much the end of the process. We'd nearly finished recording it, and Jimmy Iovine, who's obviously a sort of legendary producer and record guy, who was the head of our label in America, got on the phone and, sort of said, "Oh, it's sounding great. I think you just need like another 5 hits or something. You need to write a load more songs for it." And I was like, already on the edge of a sort of nervous breakdown. And if it already felt like too much time had gone past since Hopes and Fears, I felt like I was completely tapped out writing wise. But if I could turn back time, maybe I would have tried harder and tried to sort of do a like that whole Bruce Springsteen writing Dancing in the Dark at the last minute and all that sort of thing. You never know. But I think you do have to push and push and push, and you often don't have that luxury of time or energy as the albums go by.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that Jimmy Iovine was the head of the label there in the US. Did you have many dealings with him often, and any kind of stories you'd be able to sort of tell about him, or sort of, memories of interactions?
I mean, we saw a lot of him. He loved the band, and he loved Hopes and Fears, and he really got personally kind of behind it, which is probably why it got sort of driven through. Well, it is why it got driven through Interscope, which was a huge label full of massive kind of hip hop artists and all kind of American bands on a totally different scale to us. But Jimmy sort of took us under his wing, and I remember him flying up to see us. We were playing this place in San Francisco that was a pub, and he flew up there in his private jet and sort of came sweeping in with a very glamorous entourage, let's say. I mean, basically Jimmy was, he loved the band, and he was very supportive, and one fun thing that I remember us doing was we tried to do like a kind of mashup of Nothing in My Way, which was one of the singles off our second album, and Lose Yourself by Eminem, which was one of their records, which of course we all loved. And we spent ages working on it, and it could never quite get it to work. But it's one of the something I always felt a bit sad about. And, I think that was one of Jimmy's ideas. That's still languishing in a vault somewhere.
Will that ever see the light of day?
I don't know. To be honest, I'd forgotten about it until you asked about it, Jimmy. So maybe I need to dig it out.
Could get it onto the remastered reissue of the of the album in time for May the 10th.
About that soon.
Brilliant. I also wanted to just ask you a little bit about your relationship with the album now and with those hit songs from it, because some artists can, not all, but you do occasionally hear of artists that can become almost a little bit resentful of their calling card singles, the kind of big ones that everyone always wants to hear. How do you kind of respond these days to playing songs like Somewhere Only We Know, those kind of tracks that are always going to be, you'd think for fans kind of die hard and casual fans, they're the songs that people will always expect to hear, I guess. What's your relationship like with those songs today? Do you still have affection for them? Do you feel like they're just they're part of the furniture in the Keane catalogue?
I mean, I don't think any of us resent them at all. I sort of hope that day never comes, because I do think about it, because sometimes you think, oh, my God, how many times have we played this song? But I think that the day you become sort of bored by thousands of people singing one of your songs is, you've sort of, you need a slap in the face, probably. So, we love them. I mean, I'm sort of baffled by it, especially somebody we know. I do get it, because there's something in the lyrics of that song that speaks to everyone, I think. And is very, I think we all need to hear that message sometimes, quite a lot, probably, to kind of keep us going when things are difficult. But equally, I often feel like, oh God, I've written so many songs and we've done so many songs as a band that I'm so proud of, and I kind of wish that more of them had the same kind of light shone on them. But I mean, that is splitting hairs a bit. Don't be too greedy,
of course. And lastly, beyond the upcoming shows around this anniversary, are there any other plans for you currently on the horizon? Are you working on any other projects, any new music on the way? What's the rest of 2024 hold for you?
Well, we're pretty flat out until Christmas at least, with touring, which is great. So we're off to Europe shortly, and then UK, and then festivals, and then States, and then just announced a big South American tour, which is going to be crazy. And then it's basically the end of the year. So I mean, we are working on new stuff, which is very, we're really excited about, and we've got a load, lots and lots of stuff already, written, I think. But yeah, we're just in that process. But it's the downside is that it's very hard to find any time to kind of move that process forward at the moment, because we're so busy doing this. We're doing a tour, which is great. But the upside is that everyone's really kind of infused and excited about making new music together. So, as long as we don't drive each other crazy over the next few months, I'm hoping that we'll be have a very creative, 2025 as well. So
amazing,
feels good.
Good to hear. Well, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time out to have a chat with us. We really do appreciate it, and it's been really interesting chatting to you about this anniversary and everything that you're working on at the moment. So thank you for taking that time to speak to us.
A pleasure.
Headliner Radio, supporting the creative community.